Hey, good morning. Uh, I'm not sure how that worked out, but I wanted to try, getting on a little early so that folks could, sort of log on and get situated before we actually get rolling this morning. So good to see you all jumping on board. Hello, Ricky and Lisa, Jennifer, Laurel. Great to have you not with me, great to be together this morning. So it's awesome. As always, as you log on to this event, it's just super to say good morning to folks and use this time as a way to connect with one another, not just to me, not just to the content that we're going to be discussing today, reflecting on today, but to kind of help build that sense of community and to feel like you're connected one to another. I'm also, since you're on, those of you who are on early, little prefix, um, I'm always trying to stage these events so that they reflect the theme that we're trying to explore, right? So two things are happening this morning. One is I can't figure out how to get the portal from not paying attention to my office door. So please ignore that. Um, and um, and then the other thing is I'm going to use this scene today to help us think through a possibility. And not everybody needs to explore that possibility, but I'm going to try to use this little set that we've got here today to try to help you uh, move some of your soul's journey into different territory. And that territory is what I want to talk about today. So that's where we're going today. So good to have you. Take a little bit of a deep breath, get settled in. Let's go for this ride together. I can't even begin to believe how much can change in a few days. And I suppose you're the same, right? We all witnessed on the 6th, just a horrific, uh, force that shook at the foundations of our democracy. But we saw that on the 6th, and we all were reeling from it and trying to process it. You were processing it, I was processing it. We also paid attention to why last week in our conversation about why Christian themes and the character of the divine were linked to those kind of behaviors, and it was just disheartening. The whole thing was disheartening. And then this week we all experienced, or probably we all experienced, the inauguration event, and and that was phenomenal. And it was phenomenal because I don't know about for you. If you could share in the chat, like, what was a word you would use to describe your experience of that particular event? And I'd be curious what you come up with, because for me it was just deeply stirring. Right? I was weeping through most of that experience. And why was I so emotional? Why was I so um, connected to some place deeper in my soul in that little experience that was going on than I'm normally engaged in when I engage in politics, right? There was something about that event that pushed beyond, what's the legislation that's going to come down given the new administration? What are the new policies? Looking past the pomp and circumstances, trying to avoid staring at Bernie Sanders, who would eventually be a meme that continues to pop up everywhere. How did I push beyond that and get to this place where that was a very soulful event for me? And frankly, I was caught off guard of how deep it moved inside me, right? And I think what it was, and I'd be curious what you think it was for you, but for me, there was something about the voices, the faces, the spirit of the event that tapped into like the soul of America, or maybe the soul of our collective human experience, not just America, but on that stage to witness faces of folk of color, people of color, to witness, the aging president who's stepping to the plate. And then I think she's 22-year-old Amanda Gorman, some of her poetry I want to read today, to see her on the stage with her vigor and enthusiasm and wisdom that she brought to the experience, to see past presidents and their partners, to see Buttigieg and his husband there. And, just this is who we are, right? And it was kind of the who we are gathered together to be in a primary role in guiding or helping us imagine what our collective soul and our collective journey might look like. And so with that going on, as soon as the music began, and I can't remember the name of the gal, it's terrible, I'm getting too old for that, but when the national anthem was sung, with such tenderness, and given what we'd been through, I was just sitting here at my desk and teardrops were dripping on the floor. And I'm like, what is going on? What is being tapped into in this event? And what I'm going to propose is that I think what was happening there in some ways was what the whole human family, and I mean the whole human family, yes, it's given expression right now in this moment of our political history, but the whole human family just simply longs to acknowledge that we all are in this together, right? It's not about white people continuing to perpetuate the white privilege that we've managed to integrate into our social fabric. That's not what it was about. It wasn't about, even in my mind, Democrats versus Republicans. It was about acknowledging and highlighting and holding up the way in which we are all in this together. From the language that Biden integrated into his talk, to the poetry, to the music, to who sang the music, that's what was present for me. I don't know what was present for you, but that was present for me. So it inspired me this morning to think about this, a possible, and I've been toying with this for a while, so I'm going to toy with it for those of you who are on this morning and anybody who looks at it during the week, and maybe even propose that when we do start to come back together, maybe this is one way we could think about being back together. It's not the only way, but it is one way that we could think about being together as a community, or on a Sunday morning, in addition to our sort of traditional Lutheran thing that we do at the church that I'm a part of right now. And so the proposal is this, and that is to acknowledge, and that's why I've lit the candle, to acknowledge the tradition that we've inherited or that we hold on to collectively, at no matter what organized religious system you're in, to just sort of acknowledge that one. And to do that today, I piled up the books from my library that I began this journey with, right? The Hebrew scriptures, the Gospels, systematic theology, the sermons of Martin Luther, and then I've got Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism all piled up on my pile here. These are the traditions we've inherited from the past, right? These are the ways in which the religious experience, the articulation of the soul's journey, has been crafted for us, that we've inherited. And I want to honor those today. And so I'm lighting this candle to say, those matter, but really they sit on my shelf, right? They're on my shelf to inform the way in which I, in this present moment, are going to take this journey of the soul. I, in this present moment, are going to acknowledge the way in which spirit stirs in the world. I, in this present moment, are going to craft my own religious experience and expression. And you are in this moment as well, right? You're in this with everybody else. And so I want to pick up on this idea that many of the traditional, what would you call it, like guiding people in all the religious traditions said, Jesus put it this way. He says, I realize that I cannot put new wine into old wineskins. Right? It just doesn't work. If you try to put new wine into old wineskins, the wineskins are going to burst. They're unable to hold new wine. And I don't know how you interpret that, but I interpret it as an invitation to say, yes, there are bottles of wine that exist in my wine cupboard, right? Those bottles of wine are aging and are important, but there is new wine that we, in a sense, have to hold within ourselves, right? It's not like the old paradigm can hold that new wine. And so, what I'm inviting, and hopefully I'm explaining this in some way that makes sense, what I'm inviting you to do is to kind of say, let's honor tradition, but let's also take time to set it on the shelf long enough so that we can tap into the capacity of the spirit that's moving in our time and pay attention to it. And maybe that experience will invite us to think of new language, new metaphors, new ways of thinking about a collective soul that connect with people in the diverse world in which we find ourselves. Maybe we'll begin to find a new spirit in the land. And I mean that in the broadest sense. So today I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath and just to pause for a minute. And I'm going to take the candle from our old tradition and I'm going to light the candle that is embraced by this scene, the way in which we lean in and engage our world today. And then I'm going to just read the poetry, or at least one piece of poetry from Amanda Gorman. And as I read that poetry this morning, just listen to it and see if the words that she crafts for the inauguration, can they function for you like holy writ, right? Can you imagine that in her efforts to give expression to what she thinks is the most important themes for us to tend to, that there is something sacred in there, and that her language can serve as a new wineskin to hold the new wine, the new ways in which God is stirring in the world. Okay, so just take a deep breath with me and let's pause for a moment and do that. It's just awesome to pause for a moment, isn't it? The world seems to be turning so fast that it's just nice to honor that it's okay to slow down, even for a couple seconds, and just be present for life, not having to manage it, just be present for it. Listen to these words by Amanda Gorman this morning. And in her poetic language, let your ears hear in a way that allow it to almost feel like the way in which sacred is trying to manifest itself in the now. Okay? We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say that this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew. Even as we hurt, we hoped. Even as we tired, we tried. That we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. We seek to harm none. We seek harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. Wow. What was she, 22 years old with those words? I don't know about you, but I do find it possible. I do find it possible to allow her language to be language of the soul for me. And I'm just encouraging you, as especially in this time of the pandemic, and then as we think about coming back together, could it be that there's something important about not just clinging to our traditional language that sits on the shelf of our particular religious tradition, but is it true that as well we can plumb the conversation of the collective to tend to the language that invites us into the Spirit's most vibrant journey for our time? That's the question I'm posing for this morning. And that's the challenge I'm going to offer to you to think about. And I'm going to even have a little conversation at 4:00 today with people who want to join us on the Zoom call to say, what are the most sacred words? If you could pick words that aren't in the common religious vocabulary that can capture this collective adventure together. Why is it so important? I think if you look at, for those of you in the Christian tradition, and I think you could look at any religious tradition and find this, even in the text that's used for today, it's a text, I believe, out of John's Gospel that I'm going to talk about at the 11:00 service. But John the Baptist, who was out in the wilderness, and he is trying to manifest what he sees in his time as God's kingdom, and that's just the language that they used. I wouldn't use that language today. I don't think that's an appropriate language for today, but it was appropriate language for their time because they lived within a kingdom that they felt was oppressive, and like we talked about last week. And so they were looking for a new way to live together. So John the Baptist is out in the wilderness, and he's trying to draw people into this new way of being together. But he gets into trouble with the powers that be, and they assassinate him. They assassinate John the Baptist. And yet the movement towards this idea of another kingdom doesn't end, right? And that's where the gospel story begins. It's almost as if to say that however you understand sacred moving in the world or spirit moving in the world, it is relentless, right? It will not stop. Generation after generation, the voice of the holy will find its way into our conversation because it's always there, right? It's just always present there. And so it's going to percolate to the surface. And so as John the Baptist falls, Jesus' voice enters. And it's just an exciting moment in the gospel text, right? Where it doesn't end. It's still alive. And then when Jesus comes on the scene, and this is, of course, out of the Christian tradition now, as Jesus comes out of on the scene, his first words, the language that he uses, is that the kingdom of heaven that we're all trying to move into is at hand. It is among us. It is in the present. And the beauty of that idea that this kingdom is not locked in some sort of past tradition. It is not set out of our experience in some distant future that we're all waiting to achieve. The language that's used, and this happens in many of the religious traditions, is it's in the holding of this moment, in the nowness. It's present for you now. If but you have eyes to see, if you but have ears to hear, that's how you recognize it. It's not like you have to memorize it and then just use the memory verses to convince everybody and yourself that you've stumbled into the kingdom. That's not how it works. It's in the present moment. And if you follow the Gospels, the way in which Jesus then manifests that self in his own life, right? And the way in which the Buddha did it, I think the way in which Muhammad did it, and the way in which Taoist poets did it, is they paid attention to the lived experience they were in to seek the language and the way of holiness or sacred or how to articulate collective soul. And that's the journey I'm encouraging you to think about committing yourself to. Yes, you can hang on to the traditions of your past. I'm not saying get rid of them, but it doesn't abdicate your responsibility to be attentive to the way in which God is breathing today in this very moment. And I tell you that because while I was watching the inauguration, for me, who've been doing this work for over 25 years and for a lifetime, like many of you, I could hear the echoes of that kingdom or that vision that was so present in the core values of my religious tradition that I've adhered to and in other religious traditions. I saw it present on the stage, in the voices, in the faces of the people that were there. And it was in that moment that's why I think the tears began to fall, right? It connected to me. It stirred something deep inside of me. And I hope that it did that for you as well at some level. Because that's where soul work is done. Right? Soul work is done in the belly that is fed by heart and mind, right? So it's not just emotions, and it's not just thoughts. It's the mashup of that happens in your gut, so to speak, and that wells up and does something inside of you. That's this spiritual experience that my little mini experience that I had while I was watching the inauguration. But more importantly, it wasn't only about the inauguration. It's that because I could feel that this invitation to pay attention to the way in which God or sacred is moving in our time, in this moment, is some of the most important work that we can be doing together, because it allows us to have a conversation that's not just interfaith or ecumenical, which is an effort to merge together all of these old traditions, but it's the vibrant conversation that the world, the planet, needs to be having about, well, what matters now in our time, in our place? What is most important that we can call it soul work or spirit work? And that's what I'm encouraging you to think about today. I'm trying to think where to go next with this, right? I want you to feel as if this conversation is kind of an invitation. And I think one of the ways in which I saw it working on in the conversation that they were having at the inauguration was sort of manifested in Joe Biden's connection and language around the soul that he used in his address. And it is an interesting idea to think about, how do we reestablish the soul of America? But his combination of thinking about how we must live into the world embraced by this idea of the way in which we can be united as a people. And again, I would push this beyond American territory. I would say that's the global question, right? How do we honor our unity, that we're all in this together? And he used that language like, life can sometimes dole out that you've got your hands full with blessings, so to speak. And then there's moments in life when you got to lend a hand, right? That you pour out. It's this kind of give and take with neighbor, because we're all in this together kind of unity. I think that's what he's sort of driving at in his conversation. And then he made reference to Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln gave in 1863. And the president said, and this is Abraham Lincoln talking, right? If my name ever goes down in history, and I think these should be your words and mine, right? If my name ever goes down into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. Think about those words for a minute. If my name ever goes down in history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. And what was the act that he was engaged in is addressing justice and equity for his time and place, right? Leaning into the moment of his historical reality that he was in and trying to make the decisions that allowed for there to be greater unity amongst people. And he says in that line, and my whole soul is in this. And to me, that's a metaphor for what I'm talking about today. Trust that as you engage in the reality that is now, that this is your soul's journey. Your whole soul is in this. And then Biden goes on to say, right, my soul is in it. He said, today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. And then remember these words. The answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, don't worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same news source that you do. We must end, he says, this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural against urban, conservative versus liberal. You heard all that stuff, right? Then he goes on to say, and this is, I think, if you're listening for language that sounds like it's an invitation into something deeper, he says, we can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. If we can show a little tolerance and humility. If we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes for just a moment. Because there's some days when we need a hand, and there's some days when we're called to lend a hand. And that's how we must be with one another. We can do this if we can open our souls, if we can open our hearts. This, to me, is the most profound use of what we think of as religious language for our time. And we, as a collective, need to learn how to claim this language for our own, right? To be prophets and poets for our time. So that's the invitation for today. That's what I got out of my weepy little experience with the inauguration. An amazing event for, I think, this moment in history. Not that it's going to solve everything. It's not, right? All of that has to still filter its way through the realities of politics, economics, racial divide, inequity, white bigotry, and white supremacy, and all the layers that make up the complex experience of life. All of that has to filter its way through that. But as it's doing that, that's where its transformative capacity comes in, right? That's where it can make a difference. So that's what I'm committing myself to lean into and to try to craft the poetry along the way. And to end today, I want to go back to Amanda Gorman and use the end of her poem. And I want to do this. How are we doing on time? Yeah, I'm doing a couple more minutes. Hang in there a couple more minutes. I want to do this kind of using the idea of resurrection that's in Mark's gospel. So again, sorry to be using so many Christian references today, but that's just the way it's going to be. In Mark's gospel, Mark has an idea of resurrection that's more like not taking the life of Jesus, who was the one who was the wisdom bearer, and he manifested this idea of kingdom in his own flesh and blood, right? So we think he's important. But Mark's resurrection story is not about lifting up Jesus at the end, but inviting the community to take this journey as well. And so Mark's gospel ends, and it says, if you really want to see Jesus after Rome has had his way with him, after the, in a sense, institutional religion has had his way with him, why don't you take this journey? Why don't you go on this journey that Jesus went on? And if you take that journey, that's resurrection, right? It's like a recycling program. It's like taking that candle and then going to this candle. That's what Mark's idea of resurrection is. And so that's how we rise up, right? We rise up as we own the spirit of the generation who has fallen, just like Jesus owned the spirit of the generation of John the Baptist. We rise up and we enter into this work in our context, vibrantly trusting that the spirit of the sacred, the holy, is a part of that journey. And so in that spirit, listen to these closing words of this poem and let it be your inspiration to maybe not rise up, but to at least lean in to the way in which something's stirring in our time, trusting that, right? Amandus Gorman's final words. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy. And change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northwest, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover, and every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people diverse and beautiful will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes and we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Whew. I don't know any more sacred words than that on a day like this. So let those words, and I would encourage you to maybe download her poetry and use that as your meditation for the week. And just let your soul linger in the poetry long enough that you might find a sacred path into the moment we all call now. That to me feels like a worthy religious journey. Hopefully it feels like that for you too. All right. Okay, enough for, thanks for letting me take the time to do that. It's a journey I'm on as well. So let's shift into announcement time here. For those of you who are part of this community, just some things that you want to pay attention to. Obviously today at 4 o'clock, we're going to continue to gather. We're trying to do a Zoom experience that just feels like, what the coffee hour felt like when you were all in church back in the day, right? Except we don't have any coffee. So you're just going to have to grab your laptop and maybe a glass of wine and just jump on for 45 minutes. It's a good way to kind of say hi to people who are in this conversation and to see their faces again. We put you into small groups just for a little bit of time so you can have a conversation together. That's happening 4 to 4:45 today. The link for that will be on the top feed in this Facebook feed. So look to that. Then I'm very excited about next Sunday. Next Sunday, we celebrate Pride Sunday. And so we are honored to bring on a guest next Sunday for an interview to talk about as our kids move through their own, individual awareness around their own sexual orientation and gender identity. How does that play in the parenting role and in family dynamics? How particularly for those of you who have kids moving through that time in their life, what are some ways in which you can be present and build an atmosphere as a family or a parent that provides a healthy journey through that? And obviously that's going to be challenging and there'll be stumbles along the way. But we're interviewing a mom and in a family who has been through that. and has probably gleaned some wisdom through that journey, and she will share that next Sunday as part of our Pride Sunday. So join us for that. Then announcement of a new person coming on board. We are delighted to announce that Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, in addition to all of the graduate students that we work through with the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, PLTS, or Pacific Lutheran, has assigned us a teaching parish student. And so soon you will see a seminary student for 2 semesters. The one that we're in now, so February through May, she will be with us. And then again in September through December of next year. And is that next year? I'm sorry. No, September and December of this year. And then she'll be preaching and spending time with you on in this format, maybe being part of small groups, doing what she can digitally, but we want to welcome her with open arms. And more information about that is coming. I will need 3 people to serve as sort of a sounding board team for her as she makes this journey. So if you're interested in kind of giving a little bit of your time to be in some Zoom calls to get in conversation with her as she does those 2 semesters with us, that just let me know. That would be awesome. Then I'm very excited that this Monday, Martin's starting up Women in the Old Testament Bible study. So if you're interested in that, jump onto that. Women in the Old Testament, that is linked on the Facebook feed and in This Week at OSLC.net. And then also thrilled next Thursday, for those of you who want to join me, I'm kind of passionate about how Spirit stirs in our place in the environment. And so there is a whole movement around that theme. And there's a conference called Creating Climate Church. It's a free conference happening next Thursday. I'll post it as well on the Facebook feed, but it'll also be in This Week. You're invited to just jump on there and listen to the conversation from people who ask the question, how can faith communities kind of do what I was talking about, but do it around the themes, environmental themes. And of course, that can be done around racial justice themes, sexual orientation, gender identity themes. There's all sorts of themes you could use to kind of enter into this conversation. But given where we're at with our relationship to the environment, that one has to happen now. So I'm excited about doing that. You can join me for that on Thursday. Okay, that's it for today. There's a lot there. So thanks for tuning in and being with us for this 40 minutes. I know it was a long haul, but you can break it up into parts, revisit it. Let me know the insights you come up with along the way. And don't use old religious language. Find new words, new images, new metaphors, new poetry, new music that brings this spirit journey to life. Let it be a soul forum. All right. See you next week.